My name is Danielle Sapienza. My story is about overcoming guilt and shame. I was probably what you'd say your average American kid would be. I was good at school, active in sports, and had a lot of friends. I had a good relationship with my parents and attended church regularly. And I became a Christian young in my life and was very dedicated to learning about and following Jesus. I went to church multiple times a week. I read the Word. I was involved in youth groups and really dedicated my life to being holy and pure. I think my whole life I tried very hard to be a good kid, and in a way that is an idol because I tried so hard to be a perfectionist, a workaholic, get good grades, do well on the sports teams. But later on in life, my idols changed. I had wanted to save myself for marriage. I really believed in chastity and virtue and saving sexual relations until my wedding night. And as a devoted Christ follower, I was very hurt and confused when my first time was not my choice. I was 18 and I was raped by a friend of mine. We were study partners and met in a group often, and I had no fear of him. And that day we were alone. It was broad daylight and no alcohol or anything involved that would have perhaps caused some sort of disruption in our study session or any temptation. I really considered this guy a friend, and he wasn't even my boyfriend. I sometimes am still haunted by that day. I was taken advantage of, and my goal of staying pure till marriage was taken away. I really felt like I had nothing left to save. I was very upset with God, and I didn't know where to turn. I turned to the wrong things. Thinking back, being such a strong Christian, maybe I should have sought help or read the Word, got help from somewhere, and leaned on God at this time. But I had felt like He had abandoned me, and I turned away. I started drinking almost every night as an escape. I drank for years, and the purpose was to get drunk. I tried drugs, and being at parties, you run into other drunk people and the temptation's there. And even though I felt horrible every single time, I would just lie in bed in the morning feeling so guilty and numb, I still did it. And for years, that was my lifestyle. I sometimes went to church on holidays because in my heart I knew there was a God. I didn't just stop believing that there was a higher purpose for my life, but it didn't really matter to me. I was still angry, and I buried myself in these addictions, and I couldn't get out. Finally, one day, I opened the Bible after years of not really looking at it. I was in college. I hadn't gone to church in quite some time, and they had a Fellowship of Christian Athletes meeting with a church service and devotionals, and I went and felt almost guilty for going because it had been so long, and if these people knew what I was really struggling with, they wouldn't want me there. but I don't remember what the service was on, what music we sang, but that night I opened my Bible. I wasn't looking for a particular verse, but I opened it up to the book of Romans. It talked about behaving decently as in the daytime, not in the night, not in drunken orgies and sexual immorality and dissension. And it hit me. It was, you're doing all these bad things. And I prayed for God to really show me the depth of my problem. And that was the first step at getting past the denial that I had one. And from then, only then, when I realized and admitted that I had a problem, was I able to ask for forgiveness and ask for strength to overcome it, and then ask for the temptation to go away. I ended up transferring schools and going to a different college. And here I focused more on my studies. I had a boyfriend. I didn't go out and party with a sorority or random friends. So the drinking, I really tried to eliminate the temptation there by not surrounding myself with going to the bars and going to house parties where it was prevalent. However, being with a boyfriend, I still was tempted, being able to give that up, even in the confines of a relationship. And for years, I went back and forth. I struggled up and down, and every time I fell, the guilt just took over my life. I wanted to be convicted so that I could change, but this was different. It was shame. It was beating myself up, not understanding that Christ died for our sins, that we all fall short of his glory, but I just didn't understand that his grace was enough, that I could confess it and stop and ask for help and not beat myself up over it, that he wasn't holding every single thing against me. There wasn't a tally of how many times I had a drink or how many times my boyfriend and I slipped up, and it was hard. Even recently, years later, I've dealt with shame and remembering things that I would feel guilty about or blame myself for, the past sin that I had overcome, blaming myself for the rape itself, blaming myself for the divorce that I had. And I struggled so much with that until after my divorce, when I really examined and coped with what had gone on. And I had a real wake-up call. A couple years, I had to just focus on getting over the shame, realizing I was forgiven, and moving forward in my life. With God's help, I was able to ask for a safe haven, really, and to take temptation away from me. I didn't date for a couple years. I didn't drink. And I really focused on myself and healing after this divorce. And even looking back as far as when I was raped and really trying to process that and understand that these things were not my fault. Even the sin that I committed on my own was not something I needed to be ashamed of anymore, because of God's grace, because I confessed and was working on it. And for a few years, I just worked on my relationship with him and myself. And then I came to a point where I wanted to serve him and worked with teens and mentored them, and really felt a strong relationship with the Lord. As a camp counselor, I had an interesting conversation with a young 18-year-old girl who later that night decided to follow Christ. But then she told me about a very similar situation to my own, that she had been raped by a male friend of hers. And I was, for the first time, able to open up and say that that had happened to me too, and that I knew how she felt, and to not sugarcoat what happened to me afterwards, the downward spiral that I had and the struggles that I had to overcome it and let God heal me. And hopefully, thankfully, she's not going through a lot of the things that I did now because of the way that she handled the situation. She went to someone right away and was able to seek God's help. But that was my calling, my wake-up call, that I was not alone, that this happens, unfortunately, to other women, and I didn't need to be silent about it. I felt healed. I felt like the temptations were gone. And then I started dating again. And now I'm happily married and expecting our first child next week. So the idols in your life can come and go and change, but God's there the whole time if you just let Him help. Idols are very, very powerful, and you need the strength of God to get over them. The biggest thing was for me to realize that this struggle was not something I needed to do alone. And I met some good Christian friends that I was able to confide in and use them as accountability partners so that I wasn't going out and partying, that anytime I felt the guilt creep back in, that I could talk to someone about it. And God puts those people in our lives to help us. God's there. And I know that He's got me through so much already. He can get me through anything else that comes my way.